Okay, I think we're good here. All right, so we're gonna have a little fireside chat. What are we doing up in these veg and soils? Today I'm just gonna summarize a lot of what was done over this past summer and ongoing this fall. So if you've been to any of the talks that we give, you've seen these slides before, but I think it's a nice way to just orient ourselves. We know that the urban environment has many environmental conditions that are not ideal, such as poor air quality, polluted soils, there can be really high temperatures. And a lot of solutions to ameliorating these conditions are to use green and brown infrastructure or nature-based solutions or just greening in general, right? Just naming a color. And so the solution is just like, oh, let's put a plant in some happy soils there and we'll just fix a lot of things. And it's a lot more complex than that. And so I just like to get people to be thinking that what we're talking about are living organisms that need to sort of like complete their life cycle in a city, just like us humans are living and trying to cut it in cities. And so plants and soils are expected to clean and make all these conditions better. There are lots of evidence they help with all of this, but at the same time, these also can be stressful conditions for the plants and the organisms living in soils. And so to really for real green and brown infrastructure to work, we have to meet organisms where they are, right? And to do that, we need to really study what is there, what are the conditions, and that's what a lot of the work that we've been doing. There's already a lot of trees in Baltimore, but the distribution of tree canopy we know matches where there's areas of high investment and higher wealth generally, and there's less tree canopy and less investment in lower income areas, and there's a lot more work to be done. Okay, so the focal research question of all veg and soils a focal, I should say, is what plant soil conditions are best to achieve desired environmental outcomes. And what we're really focusing on here are reducing extreme heat, reducing flooding, improving air and water quality, and helping to offset CO2 emissions. And so what are we doing? We're going to be collecting a bunch of data. We're going to feed a bunch of this data into models, and then we're going to try and model what Baltimore is today to do a sanity check. Does this make sense? And then once we pass our sanity check, we're going to use these models to predict what Baltimore could be like in the future and what potential greening solutions could be used to make the city more sustainable and more habitable in the future for all organisms. Okay, so summer 2024, it was a busy summer. We collected a really impressive amount of data. A lot of this has been done to the excellent leadership by Kathy and my graduate student, Sam Batska. We did a lot of soil properties, we measured trees, and we are starting to do some modeling. So let's get into it. Soil work. There's lots of small teams within veg and soils, and I'm trying to present this on a team-by-team basis as all these parts fit together as part of a larger puzzle, but different people are leading different sampling campaigns. So Kathy, Ian, and Sam and undergrads did a lot of work on soil. So they are taking deep soil cores, which go up to 1 meter deep. And you can see in this photo of Sam here, we have a nice 1 meter deep soil core. And on these, have done or are in the process of doing texture analysis, bulk density, soil organic matter, pH carbonate analysis. And this has been done at several parks and at 20 additional vacant lot sites around Baltimore. These deep soils are really hard to get. And to have sampling more all over Baltimore, they are doing shallow soil characterization, looking at soil compaction, organic matter, pH, bulk density. This has been done at 50 sites. If they're co-located with tree measurements, and more sampling is planned to be done. So here is some data from this. This is from the vacant lots, the yards. This is the house footprint. Is Kathy on the call? Do you guys want me to just do all this? Or does someone want to jump in and share the results?
Okay, so these are, these are just looking at differences or variability within a vacant lot, but also comparing, looking at variability among vacant lots. And so what this shows, really briefly, we looked at in 2 different neighborhoods, East Baltimore and Northwest Baltimore. And so these are pairwise comparisons within a lot, what we call the house footprint, so where the house was stood. So that's obviously a more engineered soil because most of these houses used to have basement. and then the area what used to be a front yard or a backyard. And so what you can see is, you don't see my pointer, but anyway, what you can see, there's a lot of variability. So we took these 1 meter deep cores, we divided them into several layers, mostly based upon color. And then we analyzed these different layers. This is still going on as far as texture goes, because this is a lot of work. Well, what you can see is one is the left-hand side is the just examples of house footprint. And then the right-hand side, the same address as legacy yards. And so you can see there's a lot of variability, differences between the footprint and the yards, but there's also these different addresses shows different types of soil properties in these deep cores. So the biggest difference, well, I'll start with the surface. We also took surface cores, composite cores. Most of the time, we didn't find a whole lot of differences on the surface, and that's just 0 to 10 centimeters, which is not too surprising, because it's usually that's how these vacant lots are being created. On the top, there's usually a topsoil that brought in from somewhere. But there are differences at depths, especially when it comes to texture. So, I mean, you can read it, I guess. In terms of the general, the rock-soil ratio, the sand and silt content, and also the depths of HHT is the amended human transported soil. So it's fairly obvious in most of the time that this is deeper in the house, because that's how these soils were created and engineered. So we have a lot more data on this, and this is not preliminary data. This is actually good data, and which we are planning to write up. Go ahead.
This work that we did looking at 3 different land cover types in Baltimore. So we looked at vacant lots, similar to what Kathy was showing. We looked at forests and we looked at parks. And we looked at both saturated and unsaturated flow. And what we're finding are very high rates of saturated flow, right? This is on the order of excessively drained. So it's very well drained for all land uses. No statistical difference between them, given the error bars. And this is related to macropores, probably wormholes. However, for unsaturated, which is more related to micropores and movement of water through tension, also related to structure, we're finding differences between the land uses, with vacant being the highest, which was surprising to us. But it did have a fair amount of organic matter, and the implication is that they're actually larger macropores, even given that organic matter. And for forest, the micropores are probably smaller, and there's different structure in there. But we're in the process of reviewing this and hopefully publishing it soon.
Great. Then Peter has led a group of high school teachers who came down to Baltimore and went out in the field with Sam for a few days. And they measured a whole suite of additional soil characteristics. So they have data on mineralization and nitrification. That's how is nitrogen cycling through the soils, soil organic matter, methane production, soil lead levels, so heavy metal contamination, and then just base nitrate levels and net denitrification. And they did this in street tree pits, residential lawns, riparian areas, and then some reference areas and forested sites and retention basins. And here's a figure, a little blurry figure from this. Peter, do you want to talk through this?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah. So again, we were interested in looking at comparing kind of natural riparian areas with degraded riparian areas and detention basins, which are kind of replacing the terrestrial aquatic interface, from the point of view of, do they provide nitrogen to support the growth of trees and other types of green infrastructure? And also, do they support, do they have high levels of lead? And then also, do they support denitrification, which is an important water quality maintenance practice? And so you know, you look at the organic matter levels in the upper right. They all look pretty good. The street tree pits, the lawns, the riparian areas had pretty good organic matter levels. Nitrogen mineralization rates also didn't vary much amongst them. Heavy metals, a little bit. The heavy metal levels. These we have lead. Were a little higher in lawns and then some of the other land use types, but not excessively high. Nitrate levels also not excessively high. And then the perhaps what was more interesting is the you know, we were looking at denitrification in riparian zones, which in urban areas that were the terrestrial aquatic interface in urban areas is quite degraded in many cases. And there's been people recognize this since the 60s. And so they've created all this green stormwater infrastructure to kind of create a new terrestrial aquatic interface. And so we look at that and say, well, okay, that's good for capturing stormwater. Does it provide a nitrogen water quality benefit? Does it create a greenhouse gas disamenity by producing nitrous oxide or methane? And so both those things are true. And that's in this poster. And I'm hoping to get the teachers to present this poster at the ESA meeting next year in Baltimore. And we're trying to decide if we have enough to write a paper on it. But again, this is, you know, is a very limited data set. And I think we need to be careful I don't want this to interfere with the much more extensive data collection that Samantha and Kathy and Ian did. I think we can write a separate paper that won't screw any of those papers up, but we have to talk about it.
Great. So in addition to soils, we did some plant work this summer. This was led by Kathy and my graduate student, Sam. Here's a picture of Olivia using a air gun to shoot a weighted bag high into a tree to pull down branches. This was they did this all over Baltimore and reporters found them and they had all this PR done on them. So the goal of the summer was to study tree biomass and physiology. First, a considerable amount of time went troubleshooting the PP systems, this machine shown right here in blue. It's very finicky. We've made we're best friends with the people at the company now. We're on a first name basis. We know when their lunch breaks are. It's a lot of talk. And we went out and collected ACI curves, which measure photosynthetic capacity of plants, where they were limited by rubisco versus where they limited by electron transport. The size of the tree, so diameter, breast height, the height of the tree, leaf C to N, and then some leaf characteristics, so leaf area. And specific leaf area has to do with investment into the leaf. And is the plant a faster or slower grower? We measured 8 tree species and 54 species in total, and we were doing a contrast between streets, parks, and forest patches, but the data I'm going to present now is only on streets and parks. So here's some of the preliminary data. This is maximum photosynthetic rate. You can see that Ailanthus altissima, tree of heaven, the famous tree from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, had a considerably higher photosynthetic rate than many of the other species. This isn't surprising. This tree can grow up to 7 feet in a single summer. It's an incredibly fast growing species. But we also have lots of variability. And then we looked at maximum carboxylation rate. So how fast is rubisco being used to fix carbon in the process of a photosynthesis. And here we were contrasting land use types and species. And we didn't really find many differences. We found really no differences among species and no differences among these trees growing in different land use types. But you can start to see there's some real variability here, right? And we didn't get as many samples as we wanted. So we're going to do this sampling again next summer and dive a little bit more into the data. So that's what we did for plants. We also put in there's a flux tower at Clifton Park. This is being led by Ben from Penn State. And recently they dug a really cool deep soil pit, which just looks so cool. And so there's soil sensors to get soil moisture at depth to help with modeling. And most of the plants in this area are C3 grasses and forbs. And now, Ben, do you want to discuss some data?
Yeah, sure. So the slide we're looking at here is some flux tower results from that flux tower that's in a turfgrass field at the Clifton Park site from May to September of 2024. In this scenario, negative numbers means it's going into the ground, and positive numbers means it's coming out of the ground. And so you can see from the top graph here pretty clearly that there's a lot of negative numbers, which means it's absorbing CO2. This is, respiration in the early part of the year, and in the late part of the year, or late August to early September. And then we have this period in the middle part of the year where things really, really, really shut down, coincident with very high air temperatures. This is part of the summer cycle. These are cool season grasses, as Megan mentioned. And then along with that, you see this suppression of, you can't see my mouse. You can see suppression of latent heat flux, the third row down there. That's the movement of water with an increase in sensible heat flux. It just means it's a bunch of hot air moving around. And what I think is particularly interesting and unique about this is the also reduction you see in between those two middle lines, those two dashed lines in the middle there, the reduction of positive fluxes in the middle of the summer as well. So that means that not only is growth suppressed in the middle of summer, but respiration as well from this particular field in Baltimore. Now, that is my hypothesis, is that it's more than likely water limitation. Respiration requires heat and water. We previously to this did not have water data, but thanks to Ian and Kathy, we now do. It's out there running at different depths. We did some soil characterization out there as well. And we might get some other point type scale measurements of the soil respirations and chamber type measurements as well. I have plans to update this system. This is kind of an older eddy covariance system. We have a newer, fancier one. So probably early next year, we'll be putting up a new one, and then we'll be looking around for other turfgrass type sites in Baltimore as well, maybe a C4 dominated field somewhere else in Baltimore, because there's a whole bunch of variability. The idea is that this is supposed to be representative of the whole city, but obviously it's not. It's just one big field in Baltimore. So there's other types out there. Maybe they're more water limited, maybe they're not, etc.
Well, let's talk about July for a second here. I had to step away for a second, but did the soils dry out in July?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So and and did it not rain because you could imagine if it had been raining a lot in July, you would have had a lot of latent heat flux and a lot of carbon flux, and so you think it became water limited at that time.
Yeah. I'll refer to Kathy on that, because they attempted to install the soil probes during that very same period, and the ground was as hard as concrete. And now Ian and I were hypothesizing about why this might be on this particular field. If you look at the soil picture, it's basically a pretty thin organic layer followed by a bunch of clay. So we think the water, when it rains in the springtime, is just sitting on top of the soil. And when I've gone out here before, there's been ducks floating around on this field. But then in the midsummer, it's completely dry. And so there's just almost no infiltration at all. Everything gets evaporated off. And then if there's no water to resupply it, then yeah, it just turns into a bone dry concrete pit.
And
but now next summer we'll have data to prove it. So
okay, we had a bunch of people sampling soils in July, and indeed it was hot and it was dry. And so was July rainfall, was it below normal? Does anyone know?
I don't know what the numbers were for the summer or for July in particular. I know the fall was pretty dry and we had a bit of a drought that led to higher potential burn conditions or kind of like brush fires and things of that nature. But yeah, I think that was more later in the year in the fall.
Yeah, that was definitely the fall drought. Definitely a fall drought. And I think it was below average in July. We'll just have to look. But anyway, it's very exciting to see these data. We got to get a nitrous oxide probe on that little tower.
You're talking about cutting edge eddy covariance science there, Peter. So if we get one first, we'd be the first to market, I think. But yes.
The guy at Princeton's got one. Like we've written many proposals to stick a nitrous oxide sensor on a flux tower. And come on, who's the guy at Princeton who's got one? Super nice guy. Rondo. I'll look it up.
Okay, so now we've collecting all this data, and the goal is to feed some of this data into modeling efforts. And there's been some efforts done. So Jason made a VPRM model, which uses land cover data to estimate changes in respiration and sources and sinks of carbon throughout the year. Dan's been working on a first pass with ELM, and I think Ben has been working on parameterizing NOAA MP. And Dan, do you want to talk about just some preliminary results?
Sure. Yeah. So this is kind of just a first pass simulation using the Department of Energy's Earth System model, and it's a land surface component, which is called ELM. And so we typically this model is run at much larger spatial scales, over large regions or globally as part of a couple of climate simulations. So this is the first time, to my knowledge, the model's been able to run at this high of a resolution. And so here we're forcing the model at 300-meter resolution with National Land Cover Database, land cover information, and then we're planning to integrate. Right now, we don't have high resolution soils, so we need to work on that. But this shows you kind of the patterns of gross primary productivity over the city for the year 2021. And so there is a representation of 3 urban classes in ELM, none of which have vegetation. So we see very little productivity in the center of the city. So I've taken out some fraction of that to represent as a kind of more realistic vegetated fraction. So we are able to see some of the parks represented with some productivity there. So the goal here, so right now the model represents really broad vegetation classes kind of meant for global simulations. So for example, deciduous tree or evergreen tree or C3 grass, these are plant functional types. We want to be able to represent some of these great data on different species level productivity, at least in terms of sensitivity of the model to some of those parameters. We see a lot of variation in the photosynthetic capacity, for example. So we're going to start looking at point scale some of the sensitivities in those photosynthetic and soil parameters. And so I think ELM we're going to use, I think it's our most sophisticated model in terms of soil biogeochemistry and vegetation productivity, but it's much too expensive to do the kind of land atmosphere couple runs that we're wanting to do. So we want to feed some of that information back into NOAA MP for the coupled simulations.
Great. So what are our products? Where do we stand in terms of products? We've given several presentations, and there's been posters at AHU and the IFL meeting and the Baltimore Ecosystem Study meeting and a talk at ESA. We currently have one paper that's submitted to Urban Forest and Urban Greening that Nancy, Dexter, and I are on about Baltimore street tree communities. And there are several publications forthcoming. Peter said he wants to publish the high school student work. I didn't make this slide, but Ian and Kathy have papers they want to work on. And as a whole group, we're working on a paper looking at low-hanging fruit for urban ecosystem models. What data is there? How off are the data? And what do we really think we need to better parameterize them? And that's something we'll be working on together over the coming spring semester. And we've done tons of education outreach, and Kathy and Ian get the biggest round of applause for all this. They've done the lion's share of this work. We presented at workshops organized by CLIA. We've made presentations at Plantation Heights, Liberty Tech, Temple X. We've done demonstrations. We've been involved with the Temple X Summer Youth Program. The whole team had 4 undergraduates heavily involved in the research this past summer. So they got lots of training. And I think for the most part, really loved it, despite working in the hot, dry conditions. We've created educational materials. And this past semester, some Hopkins undergraduate majors did use some of the work here for their senior big project. And I think that's all I have for us to discuss. And we're happy to take any questions. I think we have 3 minutes.
When it comes to the permeability of the clay soils, that was really well. Thank you, first of all, for the presentation. It was very insightful to hear about that soil vegetation connection. And I've heard the mention before the clay soils in Baltimore that we talk about kind of like enhancing pervious surfaces, but sometimes when we remove the asphalt and the concrete, underneath is very compacted clay soils that where, as was mentioned, water can't penetrate. Are there recommendations, and I don't know, like in terms of how we increase infiltration, or do you think this research will provide some insights into how infiltration into these compacted clay soils can be enhanced? And if that's a question that lacks proper context, I apologize, but it seems like a big challenge we're facing.
Stu Schwartz, a professor at UMBC, has been working on this infiltration problem for a long time. And he published a couple of papers where they've got a subsoiling and compost addition. And so you go and you loosen up the subsoil, the compacted layer, especially the surface of it. You can inject some compost down there. And it has almost miraculous effects on infiltration rates. He's got a paper about it. I'll try and dig it up and stick it in the chat. But you know, it's dragging a subsoiler out there is you know, it's fairly labor intensive, but it can break up that especially that surface layer of compaction. And it's like I think Ben was saying, you know, you got a compacted layer, the water just perches on it. And if you can break that up, you can get some real advance. I'll look for the paper.
But typically, so it requires like mechanical manipulation to increase that.
That's what the subsoiling is. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is a mechanical. And then you throw some compost in there, and I think the combination really helps. I think also Kathy and Ian probably have some thoughts about this. They've spent more time digging in this subsoil than I have.
He's also promoted the use of those radishes that grow really long to break up the soil. That was one of his studies. That was kind of interesting.
Oh, so I guess certain sorts of vegetation are going to kind of like help with that soil compaction naturally. So, okay.
So Ava, another thing, so in Baltimore, we have soils that are high in clay because they're very old soils. So glaciers didn't come down this far. So we got areas lower in the natural soil profile that is high in clay. And what urbanization or what urban activities do is it wipes off those top layers and exposes this deeper layer of a clay horizon. And like Peter was saying, it's very challenging to deal with clay soils. So adding lots and lots of sand and adding organic matter can do that, but it is a physical manipulation. It is tilling it in. If you're going from sand to something that you want in terms of a decent soil for a variety of things, whether it be infiltration or just growing crops, that's very easy to do, right? You could add a little bit of clay, you could add organic matter, and your soil is going to be fine. But to go from clay to a soil that is healthy, so to speak, that has higher infiltration rates, and that's good for crops, you have to add a fair amount of both organic matter and sand. So it's pretty labor intensive, but doable.
Thank you. This has been very insightful. Thank you.
I also would like to mention that the EPA just awarded to the Baltimore, is it Old Goucher or is it, no, I think it's the broad-based community, a grant in which the idea is to improve as far as street pavements go, to replace those pavements with more permeable material and also put underneath certain materials which soaks up a lot of water and holds the water, which then hopefully will improve tree health, you know, the access of trees to nutrients and water. So, but that's just for trees. So that experiment will start actually very soon.
It's very exciting.
Kind of just a real question though, is that interesting, like the flux tower field is very impermeable. We've sort of shown that already, but Ian and Kathy has also shown that a lot of the lots they're sampling are extremely permeable. Their soil conductivity is very high, extremely high. And so there's sort of a mismatch of what kind of soil is underneath our systems. Yeah. Not really sure how to address it, but.
especially when it comes to engineered soils. So, I mean, hopefully that's our plan now, is to sort of compile all these data and then see what is where and how variable things are. Yeah.
I'm looking at the time. My second question is very.
Guys, amazing discussion. So exciting to see all this work. We should probably move over to the water team to make sure that they have time to present their updates.
They're all wet. Come on.
So I was quite impressed with the choreography of the Veg and Soils team, where people are ready to jump in, give their portions, and then take questions. You will see none of that here. So I'll ask people to chime in as the mood as they are moved to. But this is a large group. This is distilled from a much larger number of basic questions: how to current patterns and trends in extreme rainfall, land use, sea level rise, drainage infrastructure impact, urban flood risk, now and in the future. Major sources and flow paths in both runoff, storm runoff, interflow, nutrient sediment, contaminants to stream and the water bodies, including the harbor. How the different combinations of green, gray, and blue infrastructure can be used to mitigate these issues, and how ultimately at the end we'll talk about water quality in Baltimore Harbor being forced to an extent by the watersheds themselves. So Julia early on pulled the 311 data, and this shows within the city the incidence by year of different reports for either flooded streets or water in basements. And you could see there's a large zonation in water in basements in a set of our different areas. There's a lot of caveats in terms of who calls in, what gets recorded, when it is, and so forth, how severe it is. But this is a basic observation in terms of differences in communities themselves. So if you're going to talk about water, flooding, sediment, and so forth, you need to know rainfall. If you don't know rainfall, you don't know nothing. So fortunately, we have this very nice data set collected both by the city and then also by Jim Smith and Marilyn Beck up at Princeton, which is the HydroNexRad, which is a 1 kilometer, 15-minute data set that goes back 22 years and is being extended to an extent. Largely warm season, some selected cold season. The slide is from Andy based on that work. And these are these 4,900 grid cells, so very high resolution information, a couple of decades plus, so we could also look at changing probabilities of extreme rainfall. And these are the types of models that we could generate from this, so we can get much more detailed rainfall, at least for warm season. And I should mention, although the city has flood alert stations around, they are not high quality magnitude events, and there's very few National Weather Service data here besides the BES data that Claire had maintained for a while. So we have a series of different hydrologic models being used in this project. Some are surface flow, detailed hydrodynamics. Some are integrated surface, subsurface, but maybe not to the same extent of detailed hydrodynamics. And they're incorporating both green, gray, and blue infrastructure. So just take a look at a few of those. First, for the surface water modeling, the lower portion right here, we'll talk about a little bit later. This is that major flood in Maiden's Choice in May of 2018. So Ava, if you want to chime in here, please do so. Otherwise, I could talk our way through to save some time.
How about you go to save some time?
Okay, fine. And I would want to call out to this community engagement, because there's a really good summary of the outcomes of the community meeting in October that's geared towards filling in this portion of the XLRM diagram. In other words, what's important to the community? How will we produce metrics for that? so that the different levers or adaptation options can be used. These are the R of the XLRM in terms of the modeling of the response to these adaptation methods themselves. So Ava, Antonio, and others are using SWIM, EPA model with machine learning to search for adaptation options. In other words, given these metrics, what sort of levers, what types of arrangements and types of interventions can be used, both in the green and gray infrastructure. So they have been doing the SWIM modeling for the inner harbor, extending up, I think, through Broadway East. Infrastructure data from the city is, I'll just say, challenging to work with because it's incomplete. Kim will tell us that right away. Looking at rainfall data for the last 6 years. And then once again, I mentioned the really nice summary of these focus group sessions that generated a good deal of information for this. Validation data is challenging. There are no gauges, stream gauges in this area. So looking at expert opinions, that 311 data will come in handy, as we'll mention. News reports, we are talking about putting up different staff gauges as a possibility to get more storm event activity. Julian and James are using a different model, which is CityCat, which is an open source model out of the UK. It combines the shallow water equations, full hydrodynamics of the surface with pipe flow. And they've done some preliminary runs with this with a set of the different watersheds that are known to have severe flooding problems from stormwater. PC Swim, just getting started. This is proprietary, but also incorporates some resolution of surface hydrodynamics. Very nice storm sewer resolution. So these are some results. Once again, on the right-hand side, this is a blow-up of some of the results from the 311 calls that 311 calls that were logged, plus simulations of the depths of the water itself. And you can see where there's high water depths being recorded. That is coincident with a set of the reports for flooded street. Once again, the 311 calls have problems with omission. Some people may not call in certain types of events. An interpretation of events might be something else. So this is down in Cherry Hill. Once again, Julie is using design storms for this. A goal is to start pulling in some of the actual storms from hydronexride, so it's also within people's experience and memory. I think, Julia, this might not be Tiffany Run, but you'll correct me. This might be the Broadway East area, but that's fine. Same thing where we see these high water depths. We do see this coincidence, in this case, flooded streets, and then also water in basements. So this is presumably because this is surface water. We don't know what the source of water in basements is, but that's something for us to be working on. This is Tiffany Run. So there is this major event and this very nice coincidence of the 311 calls with this major flooding. You can see this is getting up to 5 to 8 feet within these areas, and people are cleaning out what's in their cars in this area. So this seems to work nicely for surface water flooding. A combination of SWIM, the group at Morgan State is using CityCat. We've also been using HEC-RAS 2D for these. We add in the ecosystem, say what the soil and veg group has been talking about. There's a couple of different methods. This is using the RESIS model that we're using at Virginia. It combines surface subsurface flow paths. So the groundwater model is a simple integrated two-dimensional model. The par flow model will be much more detailed of this. And then we're including the pipe network to the extent we can, distribution of impervious surface, and what we throw on the surface or draw out of the surface as well. It's a full coupled water, carbon, and nitrogen model. It has some relations to ELM because they share a common ancestor in biome BGC. So some of the questions, once again, this is from Andy. This is that Maiden's Choice area, and there was this catastrophic flooding that took place in this region. You could see the contours, 120 millimeters, 140 millimeters here. There were cascades coming down the street here and coming down the side streets and alleyways. There was a lot of basement flooding, catastrophic surface flooding as well. So this is one of the areas we've brought up these models for, using that NexRad data at 1 kilometer. So this is showing groundwater levels, or this is actually something called saturation deficits. It's the amount of water you would have to add to saturate the soils and the groundwater to the surface, bring the groundwater table to the surface. There's a gauge here, and all of these models we're running so far in gauged watersheds, so we could assess them. That gauge ran from about 2000 to 2005, so there's no current gauge. We are talking about reestablishing one there. This is that 140 millimeter rainfall at that time. And this is showing the progression of essentially of groundwater levels. The bluer it is, the higher the groundwater table. And the hill slope hydrology, from you're moving water from the ridge down to these lower riparian areas. It's going to raise the groundwater table in those areas. So a question is, besides the catastrophic surface flooding that came down the streets here, how much is just from these preceding events, antecedent conditions added to by these convectional events? As Ian mentioned, there can be very high infiltration rates. We've also measured that in different places. So the basement flooding is a function of this combination of surface flow that may be washing into the homes, plus the antecedent and contributed groundwater rise during those events. Going up a little bit further into the county, just outside the city boundary here, so this is an inner suburb, is Scotts Level Branch, and we've been asking the questions of what GI, green infrastructure implementation, is on these areas. These are the, in both cases, Maiden's Choice and Scotts Level Branch. This is the simulated and observed values. There's still a gauge running at Scotts Level Branch. So we're picking this up reasonably. We're also simulating the nitrogen biogeochemistry, which seems to be picked up reasonably as well. I won't talk about that in detail afterwards. But then we tested if we put in more urban canopy, if we put in roadside bioswales around all the streets, if we put in permeable roads or some combination of these, what's the impact on the amount of stream flow? And you could see that the biggest impact is urban forest, urban reforestation in this type of red right here. The other red is urban reforestation plus roadside bioswales. So we're seeing that brings down the flows. We're normalizing to millimeters per day here. But that is the most effective, and we found some contrary to our expectations effects of a set of these on nitrogen, which we won't talk about right now. I'll point out these are daily models, so we won't pick up the detailed hydrodynamics that SWIM and CityCat are doing. So we've been using the antecedent conditions from RESIS prior to the storm soil moisture to then spin up HEC-RAS 2D, which, like CityCat, is solving the full St. Venant equations for the surface flow. I won't spend much time on that either. What happens when you put in pipes, both stormwater, but in this case, we're interested in the sanitary sewers. This is for Stony Run in the city. This is the sanitary sewer distribution here. We're still working with the data to get inverts, in other words, depths, diameters, and so forth. Inflow and infiltration, we're largely looking at infiltration of groundwater into the sewers, and then when the groundwater tables are high, exfiltration out of the sewers when the groundwater tables are low. Groundwater tables are shallower in the riparian zones, deeper up on the ridges, so you get this zonation in making it wetter or drier based on where you are in the landscape. We'll lose water in these riparian zones where groundwater tables are high, we'll add water up on the slopes and on the ridges where groundwater tables are lower. What's interesting is, in terms of explanation, not much difference in terms of the ability to predict flows, the high flows, but we vastly improve the low flow predictions when we add this sewer inflows and infiltration to this. And I'll point out this is primarily during winter high groundwater conditions. So if this was just an error in terms of evapotranspiration, we'd expect that during the summer, during the growing season, the high ET. Because we're adding water in the uplands because these systems leak, this is the potential difference or addition of evapotranspiration in millimeters per day averaged over the entire basin. We could show distributions similar to what we're seeing here, but this is just stating or asking a question. The model is asking a question. Is this I&I, in fact, both the infiltration and the leakiness in the uplands, buffering ET during these summer dry downs? Parflow is what Claire's group has been running. Medad recently completed a set of 50-meter horizontal gridded runs for the entire watershed. We're not looking at results right now, but we could look at comparable spatial resolution with a much better resolved groundwater model. So we want to benchmark our simple 2D model with this. It is coupled to WRF and CLIM, but we could also use it as a soil moisture initialization for this. The advantage here is, whereas we're running RESIS at high resolution over just gauged watersheds, that does give us the ability to benchmark model performance. We're also showing simulating carbon cycling and nitrogen cycling. So we have been doing some comparisons of that with ELM and VPRM. We'll continue that. This will be able to run over the entire watershed. So just examples of Parflow that Claire had previously done with some resolution of in this case, the distribution and the storm sewers themselves. Okay, so Claire has been, first of all, we have this long legacy of Baltimore ecosystem study collected, discharge, weekly chemistry. Claire has augmented that as part of BSEC and the LTREB with more detailed high-resolution measurements over this full region. And I'll point out that Carroll Park is a boundary flow into the Patapsco portion of the harbor themselves. So this is collecting a series of different chemistry, sediment, turbidity, and so forth. This is with these types of sensors. We won't, I think this is not on order. This is from an older PowerPoint. Claire is actually showing this, and Claire, add in what you need to here. So what's the water quality response at the storm event to time scale? And then we could get a much better resolution of storm contributions and annual loads themselves. Plus, as we change the precipitation intensity, frequency, and magnitude over time, as we could see in this long, high-resolution data that we have through the HydroNexRad and from high-resolution precipitation modeling, we could start asking these questions. So sorry to rush through, but this is an example of the specific conductivity and turbidity we could make, or Claire can make at this point, nitrate at this type of resolution as well, DOC as well. We could calibrate turbidity to sediment, a suspended sediment. And so we're getting these, this is for a dead run, which is the most impervious tributary area that we've been sampling. But then at Carroll Park, this is the direct input to the harbor itself. Point out one important thing about this slide. This is the amount of old water by doing hydrograph separation. In other words, this is the amount of water that was stored in the subsurface prior to the event. And the important thing here is that low rainfall deficits, smaller storms, in many places, it's the majority of the water that's in the flow. Even at 4 centimeters, which is a pretty good flow, at Carroll Park, 50% of the water in these high flows is subsurface water. So that calls towards the importance of being able to mobilize not just the surface water, but also the subsurface water. For the example we gave before of that flooding in Maiden's Choice, we were way out over here, you know, in terms of rainfall. So that would have been much lower components itself. All right, so this is the suspended sediment loads in all these sites given by impervious surface. So we may be able to regionalize that. What's interesting for Carroll Park right here, 36% impervious, that's a direct input into the Patapsco. So that transitions to this Baltimore Harbor monitoring that Ray Nudger has been doing with Blue Water Baltimore. So they have been sampling at repeat sites, I think on a regular basis. Ray, I think it's monthly, to look at the series of basic water quality metrics. And so once again, Carroll Park is right up over here. So we could start seeing and associating the responses of the flows that are coming into these regions with the responses in this area. Of course, as we get out over here, it may be more affected by the main stem of the bay, which is influenced, of course, by other inflows plus internal processes. So once again, Carroll Park is up over here. The major part of the Patapsco comes in here. But this gives us the opportunity to start associating watershed forcing with the outflows here. So one thing we need to think about is how are we going to be putting in the Jones Falls? There's some sampling that's taking place. You know, what type of sampling is taking place here? There's certainly city water quality sampling that's occurring, and potentially the Back Bay area as well. I think we are just about at time. So Enterococcus decreasing from upper to lower because we have all the storm sewers and this leaky sanitary sewer coming in through this area, especially during the major high flow events when they're surcharging. I think that's about all we will show here, just to show that we have this potential leakage or linkage here. So I'll stop the share and see if there any of the others would like to chime in to correct what I've been saying or augment that and to have some more discussion.
So just one note, the Carroll Park station was vandalized. So we removed the instrumentation from there and we're going to redeploy it. We're looking at Maiden Choice to do that. That's just happened this summer in July. So we just got about a year of data, but I don't want my personnel in harm's way with police chases and bullets and knives and everything else. So
no, the USGS gauge will still be there, I presume.
Yeah, and I actually went there this week with our international visitor, and they have like warning federal property and this and that they seemed their station had been slightly vandalized before, but then they put those signs up and that seemed to help. But when Mary goes out by herself, I just don't want her to feel uncomfortable in any way.
Right. So I think it's important for us to look at flow chemistry, sediment relations in the data that you do have. See if we can use that to help link with.
So we only collected the suspended sediment data in dead run, and we're using the correlation between suspended sediment and turbidity and all the watersheds, which may not apply. So it's a huge approximation.
And we still sample at Carroll Park every week.
Right, but you have a team going out.
Yeah, you got to send 2 people.
Yeah, I don't have a second person on the payroll to go with Mary, so it's just not going to work. Yeah. Because she's got to, I know, we don't want our $20,000 worth of sensors ripped out. And the S-cans are on order. They're not here yet. I have one test one that we've been playing with, but not, the rest of them are in the ether somewhere.
And Carroll Park's not a great area for community partners, right? So there's a question in the chat, because it's by the golf course. You know, so there's not a lot of neighborhood.
It's very desolate there. And one time Mary was out there and there was a police chase and somebody, you know, and police cars going high speed down a bike path, which is ridiculous. So we just, it's
We
just,
sample there and we sample a little bit upstream from there. There's a tributary, the Gwyn's Run, which is a really old, very highly contaminated kind of worst case scenario urban stream. And it's also, it's even more desolate than the.
yeah, it's creepy to go out there alone anyway. So yeah. Which is unfortunate.
The bike path runs through there, but it's
Yeah.
not a super popular part of the bike path.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Julia, Ava, James, any other inputs that I may have garbled or additional information?
Now, Larry, you did a great job. The other thing that we're going to try and do with CityCat is to try and do the flood risk modeling for the whole entire city. So that'll take a little bit of time because it's very intensive on the computers that we're using, but that's something we should probably be able to get to by summertime.
Great. And one thing I also want to point out, and this picks up on some work that Claire and Aditi had done some time past. There's a lot of the total water budget that's exported in the sanitary sewers out of the watershed. For Stony Run, we're thinking it might be as much as a third. In some other places, such as the tributaries in Herring Run, the city had done some I&I measurements a while back, more. And when I first looked at these numbers, I said, no, that can't be. But that's pretty common. So a question is for these urban areas with lots of pipes that might be acting as tile drains, not the storm sewers because they route to the nearest stream. The sanitary sewers route to the Patapsco and the backwater water treatment plants. And so what's the effect of routing, essentially having a sink for a third of your water budget? So that's some of the things we're exploring. What does it mean in terms of added water, lost water? What does it do to the flows? If the city was completely successful in meeting the terms of the EPA consent decree and brought infiltration and inflow to very low levels, where does that water go? Does it evaporate, or does it show up in larger floods or higher base flows? And one thing I'll point out is when I think we had this here, it appears that, let's see, we look at the low flows over time. No, it's not this one. It was in an AGU presentation I gave. But the low flows recently in the last decade seem to be rising. Is that because of more successful I&I controls?
I just have one more tidbit that might be helpful to some people like Dan. So MADOD's Parflow CLM model is Parflow and CLM coupled. That's the way it's packaged anymore. And so he's generated soil moisture fields everywhere. And it's those soil moisture fields he's then subsequently used in a separate WRF model. So he assimilate, he sucked those into WRF. So he doesn't have them truly fully coupled, but he uses that as initialization. And that might be useful for some other modelers such as Dan to use that as initialization. Now he has through 2017 done for his specific purpose, but he can run other years. He can just, the long part of Parflow is all the spin up. So that's just another tidbit. And we're gonna try to do some other things with that data set he's generated. His focus was solely on generating the soil moisture field, but there are lots of other things that could be done with that data set, with the groundwater, for example, which I'm interested in. Yeah.
All right, I see that we're over time, so people are starting to drop, but amazing stuff, guys, from both teams. Really exciting to see all this work. Great science coming out. It's great to have these chats to integrate them. And Matt, we'll make sure to get this recording up, right, for anyone who had a conflict and missed it. And I might follow up with folks on some specific elements that we heard today. But again, huge thanks to both teams. Happy holidays for those who we don't see for the rest of the week, and we'll be in touch soon.
Great.
Take care. Bye.